Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will keep showing you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. I never thought that a pair of underwear could be the scariest thing I'd ever see in my life. I'm Alex. At the time, I was 17 years old, a normal kid who liked playing basketball and spending time with my girlfriend. Her name was Sarah. She was my age and lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in California. We had met at the beginning of our senior year of high school, and our relationship was only a few months old. That night, Sarah texted me and invited me over because her parents were away on a weekend trip. I was excited, and I drove my dad's car there without a second thought. I parked in front of Sarah's house and checked my phone for messages. I had texted Sarah that I was on my way, but she hadn't replied. Maybe she's getting ready inside, I thought. I straightened myself up a bit and walked toward the front door. The living room window was slightly ajar. I was about to knock on the door, but then I stopped when I saw a figure moving in the living room. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark jacket. Sarah had said it was just going to be the two of us. I didn't rush to knock on the door and instead observed a little more. He was walking slowly, looking around as if he was searching for something. My heart beat a little faster. I squinted to get a better look through the glass. He was wearing a green hood, which covered most of his face. But then, when he turned around, the light shone on him more clearly, and I realized something terrifying. It wasn't a normal hood, but a pair of women's underwear he was wearing on his head like a mask, with two hastily cut eye holes. The bottom half of his face was still exposed. His mouth and chin were covered in stubble. Panic washed over me. I couldn't think anymore. My first instinct was to run. I turned and rushed toward my car, almost tripping on the stone walkway. Then I remembered my girlfriend. Where's Sarah? Is she okay? I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and reached for my phone to call 911. My voice was stammering as I told the operator, "Someone broke into my girlfriend's house. He's wearing underwear on his head. Please come quickly." The operator said they would have police officers there right away and told me not to do anything dangerous. But my concern for Sarah grew stronger. My girlfriend was so beautiful. I couldn't leave her alone with him. Even though my hands and feet were numb with fear, I decided to go back. I quietly approached the front door, hidden behind a low bush to the left of the door. I took a deep breath and yelled as loud as I could, "The police are coming! You can't get away!" I immediately crouched down and hid in the bush. From inside the house, there was a loud noise, things breaking, and the sound of footsteps running. Then the front door burst open, and I was stunned to see not one, but two guys rush out. Both of them were wearing underwear on their heads as masks. One was wearing a green jacket, and the other was wearing a black one. They ran toward the backyard, but they tripped on the lawn and dropped a few things from their bags. I stayed hidden in the bush, not daring to breathe loudly. Then police sirens blared from a distance, and red and blue lights flashed on the street. Two patrol cars stopped in front of the house, and 4 police officers jumped out, their guns ready. The 2 thieves who were trying to run through the backyard panicked even more when they heard the yelling, but the police quickly caught up to them, tackled them to the ground, and handcuffed them. It was crazy that the guy in the black jacket even mumbled a request to keep the underwear on his head. I came out and told the police everything. Then I went inside with an officer to look for Sarah. She was tied tightly to a chair in the upstairs bedroom, her mouth covered with duct tape. The closet had been ransacked, and clothes and underwear were scattered all over the floor. Luckily, Sarah was not hurt, but her eyes were filled with a soulless, panicked look. After a few days of investigation, the case was reported in the news and quickly spread because of the two robbers' bizarre behavior. The police said they were brothers and had committed several burglaries in the area. The underwear on their heads was how they covered their faces to avoid the cameras. A bizarre act that even the police found hard to understand. They were arrested and sentenced to prison. But for Sarah, the fear didn't just go away. In the days that followed, she started having nightmares, jumped at every small noise, and was afraid to be home alone. It's been almost 6 years since the incident. Sarah's mental health is better after going through therapy. We are now engaged and will be by each other's side for every moment of our lives together. Every time I see pizza rolls in the freezer, I remember that night. I thought I was going to die in the attic of a stranger's house. My name is Logan. I'm 20 years old, a sophomore at the University of Texas in Austin. My mom has a close friend, Sarah. She owns a large house in the Westlake Hills neighborhood. Last Friday, she needed someone to house sit for the weekend while her family went to New York. Sarah needed someone she knew because it wouldn't be a paid job, but I could eat and use things in the house as much as I wanted. I agreed to house sit for her, thinking it would be a great weekend to have food and a quiet space to write. That night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, writing a ghost story about a girl who was trapped with a ghost. Sarah had said there were 2 shy cats in the house that would hide if there was a stranger. But I only saw a hairless, fat cat walk through the living room. It was completely different from her description. Around 8 o'clock, as I was writing the part where the ghost appeared, I saw a person outside the house. A tall man, wearing a gray hoodie, was standing next to the kitchen window. He wasn't looking at me, but at the house next door, holding his hand up to shield his eyes so he could look through the neighbor's window. I tried to convince myself that he was just someone out for a walk, but the way he moved was very sneaky and cautious, which caught my attention. He moved to another window of the neighbor's house and continued to watch. This was definitely a burglar casing the empty houses. Suddenly, he turned around. Our eyes met through the glass. His face was covered by his hood, but I could feel his surprise, and then immediately, his calculation. He turned and walked straight toward the house I was in. I jumped up, and the kitchen chair fell to the floor with a loud bang. My mind was racing, but nothing was clear. That's right, run. I have to run. I spun around, my hands fumbling on the tabletop. I grabbed my phone, and my hands were shaking. It took me 3 tries to dial 911 correctly. My voice was trembling as I quickly gave them my address. When I hung up, I realized I was out of breath as if I had just run a marathon. I needed to hide, and I immediately thought of the attic. I ran toward the stairs, tripping over the chair, almost falling. I climbed into the attic, slammed the door shut, and fumbled with the latch. It was at that moment, in the stuffy darkness, that I realized my fatal mistake. Turning off the lights and hiding in the attic made the house seem empty, a perfect target for a burglar. I huddled in the corner and bit my lip to stop myself from breathing too loudly. About 5 minutes later, there was the sound of glass shattering. I flinched, almost screaming. So he had gotten into the house. I clenched my hands, my whole body tense. Every sound made me jump. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. The sound got closer and closer. It sounded like he was checking every room. The footsteps stopped right under the attic door. At that moment, my mind felt like it was going to explode. The feeling of hopelessness, like an animal backed into a corner. I jumped up and yelled, "I have a gun! If you don't get out now, I'll shoot." And then a miracle happened. The front door suddenly opened and slammed shut. I collapsed onto the wooden floor, unable to believe it. I had scared a burglar away by pretending to have a gun, and he believed me. A few minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers checked the damage and shook their heads when they saw the broken window. This is the 7th time this month we've had a report of a burglary. It's always wealthy homes and on the weekends. Luckily, he hasn't hurt anyone yet. I nervously asked the police if it was illegal for me to lie about having a gun. He laughed and said, "No. You're very smart for protecting yourself." After the police left, I called Sarah and my mom. Sarah was worried and didn't blame me. She asked if I wanted to go home early. I said, "I'll stay. I need to be responsible for the job I accepted." But my nerves were shot. I needed a way to de-stress, to get revenge on that terrifying night. My eyes went to the freezer. I found 2 bags of pizza rolls, a total of 180. I ate all of them that night. My body was still shaking after I finished. I continued to eat a few apples and drink some milk. My full stomach made me feel a lot better. Sarah's family returned the next morning. They were happy that I was safe. Since then, every time I see pizza rolls, I remember that Friday night in Westlake Hills, when I not only faced an intruder, but also overcame my own fear. I get why, in every horror movie, the characters open the door to a stranger. It's not because they're dumb. It's because in that moment, the human brain still tries to find a logical reason for something out of the ordinary. This happened 4 years ago. I was 17, living with my family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My parents usually went bowling on Friday nights, leaving me and my sister Kate, who was 13 at the time, at home. We usually ordered pizza and watched horror movies. Domino's was always our first choice. That night, I dialed the number as usual. A man's voice answered, and it sounded strange and confused, like he had just woken up or wasn't expecting the call. I told him I wanted to order a pizza. After a few seconds of silence, he just responded awkwardly, "Okay." I wasn't happy with the customer service, but I figured he was a new employee and let it go. I ordered an extravaganza pizza and gave him our address. The call ended abruptly without him asking for my phone number or mentioning the price or delivery time. At the time, I didn't care much. We sat in the living room and waited. My stomach was rumbling, and Kate kept looking at the clock. I went to the living room window and pulled the curtain back to look outside. Just then, a car appeared and was driving pretty slowly. The car stopped in front of our house. The driver's door opened, and a tall, skinny man got out. I was excited because I thought we were getting pizza. But when he walked under the streetlights, I stopped when I saw he was wearing a black ski mask. He wasn't holding a pizza or anything else in his hand. I was still standing at the window. My heart started to beat faster as I realized something was wrong. There was no Domino's sign on top of the car. Every cell in my body screamed, "Danger." I told Kate to turn off the TV and get down. We lay face down on the carpet. Kate looked at me with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening. I put a finger to my lips to signal her to be quiet. A knock on the door sounded. We didn't dare to move. A few seconds passed, and the knocking sounded again, louder this time. Along with it was a voice saying, "Pizza delivery." I immediately recognized the man's voice from the phone call. A part of me still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he really was a pizza delivery guy. Maybe the mask was just to keep him warm. Maybe he forgot to bring the pizza from the car. But my instincts told me to stay still. The man said he was the pizza delivery guy bringing us pizza. The way he used the words sounded strange, like he was reading from a script. Then he raised his voice as if he had lost his patience. opened the door. He was no longer pretending to be a polite service worker. Kate squeezed my arm tightly. Her body was trembling. I could feel her fear transferring to me. The knocking stopped. A heavy silence hung in the air. My muscles were tense from lying in that position for so long, but I didn't dare to move. Finally, the sound of footsteps rang out again, slowly fading away. I waited until I was sure he had left the porch. Then I crawled to the window. I only poked my head up just enough to look outside. The man was walking toward his car but hadn't left yet. He stopped, turned his head, and looked back at our house. In that moment, I felt like he was looking directly into my eyes. Even though I couldn't see his real face through the mask, I felt his gaze as a cold shiver through the window, giving me goosebumps. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away. My hands and feet were numb, and Kate was still shaking. I told her about the phone call, about how I might have dialed the wrong number. The more I talked, the more I understood what had happened. I had accidentally called a stranger and carelessly gave them my address and the fact that it was just my sister and me at home. We called Domino's again, checking the number 3 times. The person on the other end of the line was a professional, friendly employee, which made me feel like I was back in the normal world. More than 20 minutes later, the familiar car with the sign on top parked in front of our house. The delivery guy was a young man in a uniform, getting out with a hot pizza box. I opened the door, took the pizza, and looked around. I didn't expect to see anything unusual, but I still had to do it. That pizza was the best pizza Kate and I had ever eaten. We were so hungry and tired, and we had just gone through a heart-stopping situation. I can't stop thinking about that night. I've asked myself a few times, what if we had opened the door? Was it a spontaneous plan by the man because of my wrong number? Or had he done things like this before? I'll never know the answer. But every time there's an unexpected knock on the door at night, I still look through the window before I open it. Because sometimes doing nothing is the decision that keeps you alive. I'm Ryder. This happened when I was 14. My mom and I had moved to Austin, Texas, after my dad died in a car accident 3 years earlier. My mom worked the night shift as a nurse at a hospital, so I was often home alone. I was a pretty lonely kid, partly because of my personality and partly because of a strange allergy that made me have to avoid most things: rainwater, peanuts, milk, and even animal fur. My only joy was playing video games, and I was really good at them. I had a group of gaming friends, and they called me a prodigy. It all started when my mom brought home a new allergy medication. Many patients had tried it and found it to be very effective. I was desperate to get rid of this awful disease, so I was willing to try any medicine. My mom told me to take 2 pills every morning. They had no taste, and to my surprise, the pills actually worked for me. I could eat cheese pizza and leave the house without my mask and long clothes. I even tried petting the neighbor's dog. I was fine. There were no unusual signs. My mom was so happy that I had finally found the right medication. But then, strange signs started to appear. I was less focused and often zoned out. I would sit in front of the screen with my mouse in hand, but my reflexes were slower than usual. In an important match with my team, I kept making stupid mistakes. I could sense my friends' frustration and disappointment, but I didn't know how to explain it. Gradually, I started declining invitations to play games. I didn't feel as happy as before. Everything felt meaningless. I would play by myself in silence, but I chose to stay silent instead of telling my mom. I didn't want to worry her. My mom's job was incredibly busy. Every time she came home, she would cook, ask me a few questions, and then go to sleep because she was exhausted. I didn't want to bother her more. That fateful night, I was home alone as usual, and for the first time, I felt the apartment was eerily quiet. I sat alone in my room, staring at the computer screen that showed a defeated game. "You're not good at anything anymore," a thought popped into my head, but it was just a fleeting thought. But slowly, the thoughts became more frequent. I covered my ears, but the voice still echoed, because it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my head. "Your friends don't need you anymore. Your mom worked so hard to raise a useless kid." I shook my head hard, trying to chase it away. But the voice continued, every word as clear as if someone was sitting right next to me, whispering in my ear. My heart was pounding. Cold sweat started to run down my body. "They just pity you. They laugh at you behind your back. You know what you have to do." My body stood up as if I were being controlled. My feet automatically walked toward the medicine cabinet. I grabbed every bottle, painkillers, sleeping pills, and even the allergy medication I was using. I poured them all into a plastic cup and turned on the faucet to dissolve them. "Drink it. Then everything will end. You won't be a burden to anyone anymore." I picked up the cup and brought it to my mouth. Just as I started to feel the bitter taste of the pills spreading on my tongue, the phone suddenly rang. I was startled. It was a text message from Jake. "Hey, you want to play? We're gonna lose without you." The voice in my head went silent as I read the message. I looked at my phone, then at the cup of pills. Maybe I should play one last game. At least to say goodbye to the thing that used to be my everything. I put the cup down and went back to my room and turned on the computer. The game lasted longer than I thought it would, and I was leading the team. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of joy. I heard my friends talking, yelling, laughing, and cheering every time I scored. I don't remember how long I played. When I heard the sound of a car, I looked at the clock, startled. My mom was home from work. Suddenly, I heard my mom call my name loudly and urgently. Before I could answer, the door to my room burst open. "What's wrong, Mom?" I was confused about what was happening. My mom ran to me and hugged me tightly. "Thank God, you're safe." My mom's face became tense again. She sat down next to me and told me she had received serious news about the allergy medication I was taking. Many other people who took this medicine had experienced terrible side effects like hallucinations, severe depression, and some had even taken their own lives. I shivered, suddenly understanding why I had heard the whispering voice in my head and why I had had such horrible thoughts. My body trembled as I realized I had almost become another victim. I told my mom about what had been happening to me for the past few weeks. Just a few hours ago, I had even considered drinking that cup of poison. If it hadn't been for that text message inviting me to play, I might have. My mom hugged me, crying and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me alone. "I didn't notice you were changing. I was so worried about work that I forgot you needed attention." I hugged my mom back just as tightly. I apologized to my mom for not telling her from the beginning, but now I understand that if I had spoken up, things might have been different. From that day on, my mom always asks me how I feel. I've also learned to tell my mom everything. We understand that in a family, listening and caring for each other every day is what matters most. Now I take a different allergy medication. My mom has requested a shift change so she can be home with me more often. I was truly terrified after I learned how I had accidentally escaped death. I have changed. I'm no longer a lonely child who locks myself away to hide from my illness. I participate in all kinds of activities, and I try more types of food to see if I'm okay with them. My mom and I both learned that listening, connecting, and knowing when to speak up can save not just a moment, but an entire life. I still clearly remember my heart pounding that night, and the crazy look in his eyes when he saw me. Now I can finally tell this story calmly. I'm Iris, a third-year college student at a university in Georgia. I share a small house with my two best friends from freshman year, Nora and Quinn. We lived like three sisters, sharing everything with each other. It all started when Nora suddenly announced she was taking a leave of absence from school to go home for medical treatment. We were all surprised because Nora looked completely healthy. On the day she left, Nora cried a lot. We told Nora to keep in touch and promised to visit her when the semester was over. Since Nora left, the house had become much quieter. That weekend, Quinn went home to visit her family. I was even lonelier being by myself. I was in my room studying for an exam. Around 10 p.m., I heard a noise from the kitchen. At first, I didn't pay attention because I was focused on studying, but the noise repeated, like someone was rummaging through a cabinet. My heart started to beat faster. I walked out of my room. It was dark outside, with only the light from my room shining out. Suddenly, the kitchen light turned on. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. After a few seconds of observation, I slowly moved toward the kitchen. As soon as I stepped out of the hallway, I saw a dark figure standing in front of the refrigerator. It was a tall man. His shoulders were broad, and he had a long scar on his left forearm. When he turned around, I was startled again to see his red face and scraggly beard. But there was something familiar about him when I looked a little closer. He came toward me aggressively. "Where's Nora?" Hearing Nora's name, I suddenly realized it was her boyfriend. But the person I had seen before was a brown-haired guy with a bright smile, completely different from the man in front of me. I tried to stay calm and said Nora had taken a leave of absence and wasn't here. He frowned, looking surprised. He didn't believe me and demanded that I tell him the truth. I repeated everything again, and I told him to leave immediately. He sneered and started pacing in the kitchen. He talked about how Nora had said she needed time to think and then completely disappeared, forcing him to look everywhere for her. As he said that, he suddenly shoved a chair and yelled, "Where is Nora?" His eyes were wide, and spit flew from his mouth as he screamed. He ran into the living room, looking around for her. Then he ran to the bathroom door and opened it. Seeing no one, he ran to my bedroom door, yelling, "Nora! I know you're in there." I just stood there, my hands and feet numb as stone, my mind blank, unable to think. The scene in front of me was too crazy, and I lost all ability to react. The crazy guy didn't stop. He started smashing things when he couldn't find Nora. The sounds of breaking things echoed through the house like a nightmare. I couldn't stand there anymore. While he was distracted, I ran back to my room. I locked the door and, with trembling hands, called 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that there was a violent intruder, that I was alone, and that I was very scared. Before I could finish my sentence, a very loud banging on the door rang out. "Open the door. Nora's in there, isn't she?" I was startled and dropped my phone. The next second, I quickly grabbed my phone and begged the police to come as fast as they could. In that moment, I burst into tears, feeling desperate because I was facing a crazy person all by myself. After a few seconds of banging on the door, the sounds got louder, and the door rattled violently. The crazy guy was using his shoulder to ram the door. He roared that he would find Nora no matter what. I huddled in the corner, covering my ears. After a few seconds, the door suddenly went silent. Then it turned to the next terrifying sound. He was repeatedly knocking on the lock. I panicked, realizing he was about to get in. My mind was blank, and I didn't know what to do except pray that the police would get there in time. The final clang rang out loudly, and the door flew open. He burst into the room, his red eyes scanning the place. "Where's Nora? Where are you hiding her?" He flipped the bed, pulled all the clothes out of the closet, and threw everything around the room. I huddled in the corner, not daring to move. "I'm asking you one more time, where's Nora?" he yelled in despair, continuing to smash things. My fear reached its peak. I was in a small room with a crazy person, and I felt like I was about to die from panic. I couldn't breathe and could only pray for it to end. Finally, police sirens blared loudly. He stopped smashing things. It took him a few seconds to process. Then he ran to the front door. The sounds of yelling and scuffling echoed in. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. "The intruder has been arrested. You can come out now," an officer announced. I shakily stepped out and saw the house was a war zone. He was taken away on charges of breaking and entering and making threats and would be held for at least 48 hours. I couldn't sleep a single minute that night. The next day, I called Nora. When I told her what had happened, she was silent and then burst into tears. Nora apologized for putting me in danger. She never thought he would come all the way here. The truth was, Nora didn't actually take a leave of absence because of an illness. She left to get away from him. Nora told me about the terrifying months she had gone through. He had controlled her every move, manipulated her psychologically, and threatened violence every time Nora wanted to leave him. I thought leaving would end everything, but I never thought it would make him go crazy and act like that. I encouraged Nora a lot, telling her to come back to school because he had been arrested. He was sentenced to 1 year of probation and a 5-year restraining order against Nora. Nora agreed. Quinn also came back and was shocked to hear what had happened. We cleaned everything up together. In the following days, we replaced all the locks and installed a security camera system. 3 months later, sitting in the repaired house, I still jump every time I hear a strange noise. Nora is now back in school, stronger and no longer having to face her dark past alone. We've grown closer after what happened and realized that no matter how much darkness there is, as long as you have faith and support, you will always find the light to move forward. That awful night went down 13 years ago, when I was 15. My family had a log cabin tucked away among tall pine trees, not too far from the Blue Mountains. It was the place we always ran off to every summer to get away from the crazy heat in the city. For a kid like me, the woods and the lakes felt like a whole world full of endless adventures. That summer, my parents had to take my little sister to the doctor because she kept having this stubborn high fever. They trusted me to stay at the cabin by myself, promising they'd be back before sunset. I had Zoe, my loyal Labrador retriever, and a satellite phone in case I needed to call for help. For a 15-year-old, getting to be home alone felt like a badge of honor. I figured I'd make the most of it and go fishing, so I grabbed my dad's old fishing rod and hollered for Zoe to come with me. The air was crisp and cool. Birds singing all through the forest made it feel like the trees had their own band. I picked my usual fishing spot, this little rock sticking out into the lake, where you could see the whole stretch of that blue water. Zoe plopped down next to me, her snout resting on her front paws, her eyes keeping a sharp lookout. I cast my line into the water and waited. Time dragged on in a slow, peaceful way. A little fish nibbled on the hook. I yanked it up, but it slipped off, leaving me sitting there feeling pretty bummed out. About an hour drifted by, and that's when I started to feel something shift. At first it was just this quick, creepy feeling, like someone brushed the back of my neck with an icy finger. Zoe picked up on it too. She slowly got to her feet, the fur on the back of her neck standing straight up, and her ears perked up like she was on high alert. I followed Zoe's stare over to the opposite side of the lake. At first, all I saw were a bunch of tall oaks and pines. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught some movement. There was a figure standing dead still between two trees, tucked away in the shadows. My heart was pounding like crazy in my chest. I just knew it. But from that far away, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I knew was, whoever it was, they were staring right at us. Zoe started to growl low in her throat, like a warning. I laid my hand on her neck, trying to calm her down, but my eyes never left that weird figure. The figure started moving, slow and steady along the shoreline, never taking their eyes off of us. They were heading toward the old dam, where the shore got real narrow and you could cross over to our side in just a few minutes. Fear started bubbling up inside me, and for a second, all I could think about were the ghost stories the locals used to tell. Stories about some child predator who'd been lurking around these parts for years, with a bunch of missing kids that were never found. Maybe it was just stories to freak people out, but right then, facing that creepy figure, every one of those stories felt way too real. The figure kept moving, and now I could see a little clearer. It was a tall man. His walk was all jerky and weird, like something wasn't right. Zoe growled louder, and I knew right then we had to get out of there. With my hands shaking, I reeled the line in as fast as I could, not even bothering to pack up the rod. I grabbed Zoe's collar with my other hand and started backing away from the lake, keeping my eyes glued to that creepy guy. He had stopped, just stood there like a freaking statue at the edge of the trees, only a few dozen meters from the dam. Then, real slow, he lifted his head and locked eyes with me. That's when I dropped the fishing rod and bolted, with Zoe tearing off right beside me. We didn't even try to stick to the trail, just tore straight through the woods, crashing through bushes and stumbling over tree roots sticking out of the ground. I didn't dare look back, too scared he was already crossing the dam and coming after us. Every time a branch snapped behind me, it felt like my heart was going to blow right out of my chest. I tripped over a root and scraped my knee, but I didn't even slow down. Fear just kept me flying. When the cabin finally came into sight, I sprinted through the front door and slammed it shut, locking it tight. I yanked down all the curtains, turning the place into my own little fortress. Zoe kept pacing back and forth in the living room, stopping every once in a while to glare out the window, her ears perked up and this low growl rumbling from her throat. I thought about Dad's shotgun locked up in the bedroom closet. Dad had shown me how to use it, always hammering it into my head that it wasn't a toy. I knew exactly where he kept the key, tucked away in his fishing tackle box. With hands still shaking, I opened up the locker, grabbed the shotgun, and checked it. It was loaded. I wasn't planning on using it, just keeping it around for a worst-case thing. The next few hours crawled by with me wound up tight as a spring. I sat there in the living room, my back pressed against the wall, staring out the window with the shotgun right next to me. Zoe was curled up close, sometimes getting up to check outside, but she wasn't growling anymore. Maybe whatever it was had moved on, or maybe the guy hadn't crossed the lake to get anywhere near the cabin. I thought about calling my parents on the satellite phone, but then I changed my mind. My sister was burning up with a fever. They had enough to deal with without me adding more stress. And maybe it was all just in my head. Maybe the guy was just some random hiker and I'd freak everyone out over nothing. The sun started dipping behind the mountains, and little by little, darkness swallowed up the cabin. When the headlights from our car finally lit up the driveway, I swear I almost cried right there. My parents walked in looking beat. My sister already passed out asleep in Mom's arms. They were kinda surprised to see me still awake, and even more surprised when they spotted the shotgun sitting next to me. I told them everything, about the creepy guy by the lake, about feeling like someone was watching us, about the straight-up terror that had me frozen for hours. My dad listened real carefully, and little by little, the tired look on his face got replaced by something a whole lot more serious. The next morning, Dad and a couple of neighbors hiked down along the shore to see if they could find any sign of the guy. They found these big boot prints sunk deep into the wet mud right where I said I saw him. The tracks led straight to the dam, then vanished into the thick woods on the other side, heading right for our cabin. 2 weeks later, the cops picked up some guy in a town not too far away. They thought he might be the one behind a bunch of cabin break-ins and even some attacks on kids around the area. At his house, the cops found this super creepy stash of little things he'd stolen from cabins around the lake. Necklaces, toys, even the backpack of a boy who went missing 2 years back. When the cops showed me a picture of him, I couldn't say for sure if it was the same guy I saw at the lake. But there's one thing I'll never forget. Those eyes, cold and calculating. In the years after that, we still went back to the cabin every summer, but it just wasn't the same anymore. I never wandered off by myself again, always stuck close to Dad or some other adult. The woods and lakes didn't feel like some magical adventure land anymore. Now they felt like the kind of place where danger could be hiding anywhere. I'm Naomi, 15 years old. That evening was a Saturday night. My parents were out at a friend's birthday party and wouldn't be back until late. I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, watching a comedy. Abby, our 7-year-old dog, was curled up beside my feet. Everything was peaceful until 9 o'clock. I heard a noise from outside. Abby heard it too and lifted her head. I muted the TV and listened. It was just the sound of the wind blowing through the branches of the maple tree outside. I was about to turn the sound back on when Abby suddenly jumped up. Her ears stood up, and she stared toward the front door. I turned off the TV completely, and everything went silent. The sound of slow footsteps came clearly through the stillness. Someone was walking from the driveway, across the front yard, then toward the side of the house. I stood up, my legs shaking. Looking through the living room window, I saw the front yard lit up by the lights. There was no one out there. But the footsteps continued, now coming from the back of the house. Abby walked toward the front door, her fur standing on end. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Maybe it's just a neighbor walking their dog. But why would he walk into my yard? The footsteps stopped somewhere behind the house. I waited, counting my heartbeat. A moment later, I heard the sound of metal clinking. Abby started growling. It definitely wasn't the neighbor, like I had thought. Abby never reacts like this to familiar people. I quietly moved to the kitchen, where there was a small window above the sink facing the backyard. Everything was dark. The sound of metal came again. This time it was clearer. Someone was messing with the back door lock. I moved closer to the wall and slowly peered through the corner of the window. The motion sensor light in the backyard suddenly turned on, bright as day. I saw the back of a tall man in a black coat, wearing a knitted hat covering his face. He was holding a long metal bar, trying to pry open the back door lock. I froze, stunned. He was a burglar, or worse. I backed away, leaning against the refrigerator. My hands were trembling. I needed to call 911 right away, but I couldn't find my phone. I put my hands on my head, trying to remember where I had left it. The sound of metal scraping against the lock continued. He seemed to be getting impatient. Abby ran into the kitchen, looking up at me, still growling toward the back door. I hugged Abby's neck, whispering, "Shh, Abby, don't make a sound." But Abby wouldn't listen, her growling getting louder. The scraping noise immediately stopped. I held my breath. He knew someone was inside. A few seconds passed, and I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs at the back of the house. He was walking down to the backyard, leaving the back door. But I knew he wasn't leaving. The footsteps moved from the backyard to the side of the house. He was walking around, checking other entrances. I heard him try pushing against the window frame. It was locked, but he was still trying. Then he moved to the living room window. Abby barked sharply. I rushed to cover her mouth, but it was too late. The footsteps stopped at the living room window. I imagined he was standing out there, staring through the glass, knowing for sure someone was home. My heart pounded harder and harder. I had to do something. Then suddenly I remembered my dad's gun. He keeps it in the closet in their bedroom. The footsteps started again. Now he was in front of the house. I didn't have much time to hesitate. I picked up Abby and ran down the hall to my parents' bedroom and opened the closet. I felt a little safer. My dad's old shoebox was at the bottom of the closet. I opened it. Inside was a small handgun next to a box of bullets. I picked it up and checked the magazine like I had seen my dad do. 6 rounds, all there. I took the safety off, my hands still shaking. Abby was standing by the door, looking toward the stairs with her ears perked up. The scraping from the basement started again. The basement door was old, and the lock wasn't very secure. If he kept at it, he could open it. Abby ran toward the basement stairs, barking loudly. Her barking echoed through the house like an alarm system. The scraping from the basement grew louder. I looked at the gun in my hand. If he came in, if he meant to hurt me, would I be able to pull the trigger? The scraping stopped. Abby stopped barking but was still growling. I listened. There were no footsteps from the basement. He hadn't entered the house. Instead, I heard heavy footsteps moving outside, climbing the concrete steps leading from the basement door to the yard. He had given up. I collapsed onto the bedroom floor, leaning against the bed. Abby ran up to me, licking my face. I held her tightly, feeling her warmth. Now I needed to call the police. The phone had to be somewhere under the living room couch. I ran downstairs and found it in the corner of the sofa. But before I pressed the call button, I heard a car engine from far away. The headlights shone through the living room window. The car was turning into our driveway. My parents were home. I still didn't dare open the door to run outside. I just stood still, listening. But Abby had noticed, her tail wagging furiously. My parents stepped into the house through the garage door, talking about the party. "Sarah? Are you asleep?" my mom called. I ran to them, still holding the gun in my hand. When my parents saw me like that, their smiles immediately disappeared. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" my dad asked, quickly taking the gun from my hand. I told them everything, my voice shaking. My dad turned on the back porch light and grabbed a flashlight to check around the house. We called the police. 2 officers arrived, took my statement, and checked the house. The basement door and the back door showed signs of tampering. It was likely that someone was testing out which house was easy to break into. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, with Abby curled up next to me, listening to every sound outside. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen and overheard a conversation between Uncle Peter and my dad on the phone. "Jack, I stopped by your place last night, but no one answered the door." My dad was silent for a while. "Did you do anything there, Peter?" "Well, I just wanted to leave a thank you card and a gift card for Sarah. She helped me with my presentation last week, and I just got promoted." "Did you try any of the doors?" "No. I just left the card and left." My dad and I looked at each other in silence. So, the first footsteps were from Uncle Pete, and the one who tried to pry open the lock and walk around my house came later. I shuddered as I realized, if Uncle Pete hadn't come first, I might not have been alert in time. It's chilling to think about. This happened when I was 16. It was a weekend in Ohio. My parents were out at a friend's wedding and said they'd be home late. They asked me to stay home and take care of my little brother. He was 6, clingy, and always glued to cartoons. Jake was planted in front of the TV in the living room, totally zoned out. I headed to the kitchen to grab some orange juice from the fridge. Our house sat at the very end of the street, with just a few other houses scattered nearby. Behind us was a small patch of woods, mostly tall oak trees. As I was pouring the juice, I glanced out the kitchen window. It was already dark out, and the yellow streetlights were casting this dull glow over the driveway. That's when I saw someone standing next to my neighbor's trash can, maybe like 30 feet away. He looked like he might have been homeless. He was staring straight at me, right through the kitchen window. I took a step back. Maybe he was just passing by. I waited a few seconds, then looked again. He was still there, still staring. Only now he was closer. He was standing right at the edge of our yard. "Jake, come upstairs," I called out, trying to sound chill. "Why?" "The cartoon's not over yet. Just go upstairs." Now Jake must have caught the seriousness in my voice, 'cause he shut off the TV and dragged himself upstairs without arguing. I flipped off the kitchen light and looked out the window again. The guy was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Maybe he'd finally left. But just as I turned to leave the kitchen, I caught movement by the dining room window. He was still there, circling the house. My heart was slamming in my chest. I took off running, checking every door and window, hands shaking as I double-checked the locks. My palms were slick with sweat. Then I got to the living room, and there he was, outside, right there, trying to mess with the window. I backed up until I hit the wall. I needed something, anything. My brain was spinning. Kitchen knife? No, too risky. What if he grabbed it from me? I yanked open a drawer and fumbled around. My hand landed on something cold, heavy. Mom's meat hammer. I pulled it out, felt the solid weight in my hand. "Jake," I whispered, still downstairs. "What?" Relief washed over me. He was okay. I peeked out one last time, then crept upstairs to him. He saw the hammer in my hand and squinted. "What are you going to do with that?" I didn't answer. Just went around the house, turning off every light. The place went pitch black. Only a bit of street light spilled in through the windows. I took Jake to my parents' room and locked the door behind us. This room was all the way down the hall, the farthest one from the stairs. If anything happened, at least we'd have some time. "Why'd we turn off the lights?" Jake whined. "We're playing hide and seek," I told him. I pulled him into the closet. It was just big enough for the two of us to sit down inside. Jake huddled close next to me. Through the crack in the door, I had a partial view of the bedroom window. I listened. Other than the wind rustling through the oak trees, it was dead quiet. 10 minutes passed. Maybe the guy had left. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Jake was getting antsy. He wasn't built for sitting still this long. He kept whispering about wanting to go back down to watch cartoons. Not yet. Sit still. But I'm bored. I put a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Stay still." "We'll go down in a bit." And then I heard something. From downstairs, a soft scraping sound, like someone trying to jimmy open a window. I gripped the meat hammer tighter. Jake must have felt me tense up, 'cause he went quiet too. The scraping stopped. Then came a sharp crack, glass breaking. Jake flinched, clutching my shirt. "What was that?" he whispered. I quickly covered his mouth with my hand, told him without words, "Don't make a sound." Then we heard it. Heavy footsteps, slow, measured. He was inside. I pulled Jake even closer, feeling him shaking against me. The footsteps moved across the living room. I heard furniture being dragged, drawers yanked open. He was going through everything. Jake leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I'm scared." "It's okay." "I'm here," I whispered back, though my voice was shaking just as much as he was. Then I heard the fridge open, the clink of bottles inside. Footsteps moved closer, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. The whole house went quiet. The only sounds were me and Jake, breathing hard in the dark closet. Then the footsteps started up the stairs, one slow step at a time. The old wooden stairs creaked under his weight. He wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. I gripped the meat hammer tighter, heart pounding. He reached the top and paused. I could hear him breathing, a raspy, wet kind of wheeze. He was right outside the hallway, just a few steps from my parents' bedroom. Then he turned left into my room. He was going through the house, room by room, systematic. Then he moved into the little upstairs lounge. Books hit the floor. Chairs got knocked over. Then his steps stopped right outside our door. I quickly signaled Jake to stay quiet and held my breath. He froze in my arms. We heard the doorknob turn. Click. The lock held. He twisted it again, harder this time. The door rattled in its frame, wood creaking, but it didn't budge. Then came the pounding. Heavy, violent blows, over and over, hammering the door. Jake started to cry. I pulled him in tight and slapped a hand over my own mouth to keep from making a sound. Then suddenly it stopped. Silence. Total silence. We stayed still, just listening. Sweat was dripping down my back. The arm I had wrapped around Jake had gone completely numb, but I didn't dare move. The hammer in my hand felt heavier by the second. 15 minutes crawled by. Jake had finally stopped crying. Then, off in the distance, I heard sirens. They were getting closer, louder. Suddenly, footsteps rushed, bolting down the stairs. Then, bam! The back door slammed shut, hard enough to shake the whole house. A police car screeched to a stop out front, red and blue lights flashing through the windows. I heard voices, officers shouting, radios crackling. Still, I didn't move. I was locked in place, clutching the hammer, holding Jake tight against me. Then came the call. "Police! Is anyone home?" Only then did I slowly open the closet door. Jake had fallen asleep in my arms. I carried him downstairs and opened the front door. 2 cops stood on the porch, with my neighbor, Maya, right behind them. Another pair of officers were already inside, shining flashlights over the shattered glass in the living room. "Are you hurt?" Maya asked, her face full of worry. I shook my head, still gripping the hammer. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't let it go. I hadn't even had time to call the cops. Thank God Maya saw someone creeping around our yard and dialed 911 right away. A few minutes later, Jake woke up, groggy, then totally lost it when he saw strangers in the house. I called my parents. My mom's voice was panicked on the phone. She said they'd be home right away. When they got back, she wrapped her arms around me and Jake. She was sobbing, her shirt soaked with tears. Dad just put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. An hour later, the cops finished taking our statements. They said they'd let us know as soon as they had more on the guy. Even after the cops left, Mom still couldn't calm down. She just kept hugging us and crying. Dad said he was installing cameras and an alarm system first thing in the morning. A few days later, my parents got a call from the police. They found him. The guy's name was Robert. They caught him the next morning, hiding out in a camper about 13 miles from our place. Turns out he'd escaped from the Indiana State Psychiatric Hospital 3 days earlier. He had a history of child abuse and had been locked up for the last 5 years. What stuck with me most, what I still see sometimes when I close my eyes, was the look on his face. Those empty, dead eyes staring at me through the kitchen window that night. I'm Lori, and I live with my parents and younger brother in Millfield, Ohio. That night was the 4th of July. I was sitting on the sofa, flipping through TV channels when the first firework exploded. "Lori, can I have some hot chocolate?" My brother Josh called from the kitchen. "Hot chocolate in July, are you sure?" I chuckled softly, but still got up to make it for him. I was 18 and used to taking care of Josh when my parents were out. My parents had gone to Akron to visit Aunt Margaret because she broke her leg. They'd be back late, probably after midnight. Before they left, Mom had repeatedly told me, "Lock the door securely, don't open for anyone, and call me right away if anything happens." I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge for milk. I looked out the window. The neighbors' houses were lit up, and the sounds of families laughing and watching fireworks drifted in. "Lori, someone's in the backyard." Josh's voice suddenly turned serious. I turned to see Josh standing by the living room window, the curtain pulled back just a crack. It's probably Mr. Henderson watering his plants. I poured milk into the pot. It's not Mr. Henderson. They're wearing a white lab coat, like a doctor. I turned off the stove and walked to the window. Josh stepped back, his face pale. I looked out. In the dim light from the porch lamp, I saw a figure standing by the fence, their back to me. The man was tall and thin, wearing a white lab coat and black pants. He stood silently, as if observing something. It's probably a doctor from the hospital. Maybe someone got hurt by fireworks. I offered a logical explanation, but my heart started pounding faster. The man turned around. His face was pale, his dark eyes staring directly at the window. He smiled stiffly. "Lori, I know you're in there." His voice echoed through the glass. I flinched, pulling Josh away from the window. The man stepped closer. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my phone, but my hand shook too hard, and it fell to the ground. "Lori, I don't want to hurt you." He was now right at the door, placing his hand on the glass. "You wish you could be a better sister, right, Lori?" Josh suddenly burst into tears. "What is he talking about, Lori?" I hugged him tight, my brain spinning, trying to make sense of it. Why would he know that? Suddenly, a loud crash of breaking glass. The man had smashed the kitchen window. He reached in, unlocked it, and climbed into the house. "Run!" I pulled Josh upstairs, my heart pounding like a drum. We ran into my parents' room. I locked the door. "Lori, don't run anymore. I just want to help." His footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and steady. He wasn't rushing, as if he knew we couldn't escape. Josh trembled in my arms. "Lori, I'm scared. I don't want to die. You won't die. I'll protect you." I looked around the room for something to defend myself with. In my mom's dresser drawer was a box cutter. I grabbed it, the small blade trembling in my hand. "Lori, do you remember the day it happened? The day the stray bullet flew into the playground?" The man's voice now sounded like it was right outside the bedroom door. "You witnessed Josh die right there." "No," I screamed. "Josh is still here." "He's alive." The man's voice echoed through the wooden door. "Lori, you've been living in an illusion for the past 5 years. Josh has been dead for a long time." I looked down at Josh in my arms. He was still trembling, still breathing, still warm. "That's not true. Josh is still here." The door opened even though I had locked it securely. The man stepped in. "Lori, it's time you face the truth." He reached out to us. I swung the small knife, trying to protect Josh, but when I looked down, my arms were empty. Josh was gone. Light suddenly flooded the room. My mom's voice echoed from downstairs. "Lori, we're home." I blinked. The man had vanished. I was sitting alone in my parents' room, the knife stuck in the wooden wall. My parents ran up, their faces full of worry. "Lori, what are you doing here? Why are you holding a knife?" I looked around the room, searching. "Where's Josh? Where is Josh?" Mom knelt beside me and burst into tears. "Lori, Josh passed away 5 years ago." I stared at my parents in shock. Memories of that day flooded back. Josh lying in a pool of blood on the playground, the sirens and screams. I held him in my arms, begging him not to die, but it was too late. "No, Josh is alive. I just talked to him." Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "Lori, we're taking you back to the hospital. Dr. Peter will help you." I sat there trembling. In the corner of the room, I still saw the shadow of the man in the white lab coat. So he was my doctor. But I knew very well that no matter how much medication I took or how many doctors I saw, the terrifying feeling and the pain of losing Josh would always stay with me. Outside the window, fireworks still bloomed in the Ohio summer night sky. But for me, summer had ended a long time ago. I moved out of Austin 3 months ago, but I still haven't had a single night of sound sleep. Every time I hear a key turn in a lock, my heart pounds like it did that first time. I'll probably never forget that night. It all started with a stupid mistake. I'm Mike, and I work at a software company in Austin, Texas. That day, I'd lost my house keys and couldn't for the life of me remember where I'd left them. By evening, standing in front of my own door, unable to get in, I felt truly foolish. There was no other option but to break the lock. I decided I'd replace the whole lock set afterward. I searched on Google, and the first company that popped up had pretty good reviews. I didn't hesitate. I called them right away. Around 9 o'clock that evening, a pickup truck pulled up in front of my house. A man stepped out of the truck. He introduced himself as Dave, an employee of the company. "Nice house you've got here. Do you live alone?" Dave looked around my home. "Yeah, I've been renting it for 2 years," I replied, leading him to the front door. Dave began working. While replacing the lock, he continued to chat casually. "What do you do for work?" "You look pretty young. I'm a programmer." "Ah, tech industry. Must be flexible hours, huh? What time do you usually get home?" "Depends on the project, but usually 6 or 7 in the evening." Dave didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded and focused on his work. He was quick and skillful. In only about 20 minutes, The new lock was installed. "All done," Dave said, handing me 2 new keys. "Give it a try." I tried locking and unlocking a few times. Everything worked smoothly. I went to pay, but Dave said he didn't accept transfers. I gave Dave cash. He thanked me and left, even carefully reminding me to contact him for support if I had any issues. Everything went back to normal for 2 days. Then, I was woken by a strange sound. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was 2 a.m. I was both sleepy and too lazy to check, so I lay silently, listening. The sound of metal clanking came from the front door. That's when I realized it was the sound of a lock being picked. I shot up, my heart racing. I had to call the police. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, dialing 911. Before I could hit the call button, light from the hallway spilled into the room. A tall, thin figure appeared in my bedroom doorway. I don't usually close my bedroom door when I sleep, let alone lock it. What a disaster. "Stay still," a low, cold voice commanded. I saw the barrel of a short gun in his hand. My body instantly froze. My phone was still on the emergency call screen, but I didn't dare press it. "Give me your phone." I remained motionless, scared but also trying to buy time. I was desperately trying to think of a way to deal with this. Suddenly, the cold muzzle of the gun pressed against my temple, making me jump. "Are you deaf?" he snarled. I handed over my phone with trembling hands. He turned it off and put it in his pocket. "Get up. Go towards the bathroom." I followed like a robot that had been switched on. He pushed me into the bathroom at the end of the hall, watched for a few seconds, and then laughed with amusement. "Sit down and be quiet. If I hear any noise, you know what will happen." I looked directly into his eyes. The sound of the bolt clicking from the outside echoed. I looked around. Everything was pitch black. Then I heard footsteps in the house, the sound of drawers being opened and things being moved around. He was ransacking my house. Witnessing my home being violated, I felt utterly helpless and desperate, constantly pulling at my hair. About an hour later, I heard him talking on the phone from the living room. "Yeah, this house is good. I found a lot of interesting and valuable stuff." That voice sounded familiar. Footsteps approached the bathroom. I held my breath. "Thanks for your cooperation. I'll be leaving in a few minutes." Finally, I heard the front door close, then the sound of a car starting and the engine fading away. I waited a while longer before daring to stand up, looking up at the small window above the bathtub. I walked over, opened the window, and yelled for help. After a few minutes, luckily, my neighbor, Mrs. Susan, walked by and helped me call the police. The police arrived. It was then, as I recounted every detail, that all the pieces suddenly clicked into place in my mind. The familiar voice, that look. "It's the locksmith," I blurted out. He'd asked about my work schedule, about living alone. He hadn't worn a company logo on his shirt and hadn't given me a receipt after finishing the job. It was highly likely he'd made a copy of the key. I felt stupid and angry at myself. How could I have trusted a complete stranger and revealed so much information about my life? I immediately gave all the information about Dave to the police. They confirmed that the phone number Dave gave me was no longer active. He hadn't left a single trace after stealing my belongings. Even the name Dave was almost certainly fake. I lost my laptop, $3,000 in cash, the Rolex watch my dad gave me, and a few valuable decorative items. But what I lost most was the feeling of safety in my own home. I moved out of Austin a week later. I understand that trust can be the most dangerous thing in the world. And I will never forget Dave's friendly voice and how he turned me into a victim with seemingly harmless questions.